So this is a really interesting point to talk about. So where do journalists get their stories from? Now, from my experience as a pre-internet journalist, we would have some stories that we would already have in the drawer, just things that we would use as fillers in the paper when there was no news. And then another thing that we used to do was there used to be telephone lines. I don't think there are anymore. Used to be telephone lines where you would call in to and listen to recordings about crimes, fires, and any kind of like accidents and stuff that would happen. So we would basically, and it was a part of the service from like the emergency services that they used to offer to reporters, so that we knew that there was stuff going on that we would cover. And then there is also the stuff that comes out of other newspapers. So that's another place that journalists do tend to get stories from. And then you have a branch of investigative journalists who have things that would probably come from tips. So that, you see it on websites now, you see kind of like tip lines, or, if you've got a story that you want to share with a newspaper. So that's another way that a journalist could potentially get a story. Now, when it comes to investigative journalism, there are obviously parameters around what you are allowed and not allowed to do. And there are laws depending on which country you're in. So, for instance, within the UK, we have the National Union of Journalists, who will determine the code of conduct and ethics. Now, within that, for investigative journalists, there's a kind of grey area when it comes to how far you can push the envelope in terms of getting information. Technically you're not supposed to break the law, but there's also this kind of grey area about free speech and freedom of the press. And this is where you get into the territory of people like Julian Assange. Now, Julian wasn't effectively a journalist, but he was a publisher. And he obviously, so the way WikiLeaks works is that you effectively go in there with your documents and you can upload the documents completely anonymously, and then WikiLeaks looks at it and publishes it. But obviously the last information that got Julian Assange into big trouble was stuff that was leaked about the American government, and it went into a whole bunch of high security territory that is the kind of place that for journalists you would be talking to your editor-in-chief about, because there is a line about where you can go with this stuff. I probably need to do an entire video on this, because the investigative journalist stuff is a lot more grey, shall we say.